Boldwood presents Last Christmas, written by Clare Swatman and read by Emma Powell. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Prologue. In the beginning, 22nd of December, 2002. Bea was always early for everything. Even, it turned out, when she was running away from her life. Right now, she was standing in the middle of a busy departure lounge at Heathrow Airport, her body being buffeted from side to side like a pebble caught in a stormy sea, staring blindly at the departure board in the hope that it might give her a sign. Should she stay, or should she go? She squinted, trying to make out the words. As they swam into focus, her heart lurched. JFK, 1615. It was too early for any check-in information yet, so she gripped the handle of her suitcase until her knuckles turned white. 4 hours was a long time to change her mind. But then again, she seemed to change it every 4 minutes at the moment, so perhaps it made no difference that she was early. She breathed in deeply and tried to relax, but her shoulders remained stubbornly by her ears. She should eat. Her stomach was in knots, but she headed towards Pret-a-Manger and picked up a sandwich at random, paid and took a seat at a grimy table. She tucked her suitcase under her legs, swiped away the crumbs with the back of her hand, and rubbed pointlessly at a patch of grease with her napkin. A roar of voices bounced off the cavernous roof of the departure lounge, and she closed her eyes and tried to picture herself somewhere else entirely, on a beach, in the middle of the ocean, at Mia's house, drinking cider and putting the world to rights. At the thought of her best friend, her stomach tightened again. Mia was one of the few people who knew where Bea was heading right now, and she'd done everything in her power to convince her not to go. Not yet, not like this, Mia had begged, in one last-ditch attempt to change Bea's mind 2 nights ago. I have to, Bea had insisted, even while her head was screaming at her to admit that Mia might just have a point. Come and spend Christmas here, with me and Deacon, and then decide, she'd wheedled. Bea had cast a glance at Mia's ridiculous fluff ball of a cat who was curled on the best chair in the room, licking his front paw with a look of disdain, and shook her head. Tempting as it is, I have to do this. She wasn't sure she believed the words even as they left her mouth. Mia had fixed her with that look, the one she'd always given her ever since they were little girls, and Mia had been trying to convince Bea to play the game she wanted to play, but Bea had looked away, refusing to give in the way she usually did. Fine, Mia had said eventually, but this isn't you, Bea. This isn't what you do, run away from things. You're making a big mistake. Mia's words churned through Bea's mind now as she sat with her head turned deliberately away from the departures board, as though by not looking at it, the flight she was currently booked onto might magically disappear. This isn't you, Bea. Mia was right, of course. This wasn't the way Bea behaved. Bea was good, reliable, quiet. A bit of a pushover? Some might say so, but Bea preferred to think of herself as flexible, easy to please. Something she most definitely wasn't was a spur-of-the-moment girl, the kind of girl who left her partner of 5 years to run off to New York 3 days before Christmas with absolutely no idea of what she was going to do when she got there. She ripped the plastic from her sandwich and pulled a corner of it away, crumbs of grated cheese scattering across the table, then popped it in her mouth and chewed, the bread like a lump of clay in her dry mouth. Until last year, when someone had decided to fly a plane into the Twin Towers, killing thousands of people and changing the world forever, New York had seemed like a fairy tale to her. Growing up, she'd loved watching films set in New York, When Harry Met Sally, Breakfast at Tiffany's, West Side Story, and had devoured Friends and Sex and the City in her 20s, which meant this city she'd never actually visited had always felt totally familiar to her. She'd long held what she thought of as an impossible dream that she might live there one day, renting a lofty Manhattan apartment, sipping a coffee as she wafted down Broadway on her way to work at a fancy magazine, a far cry from her drab job in the marketing department of a pharmaceutical company where the most exciting thing she was ever given to write was a press release on pile cream. At weekends, she'd take the railroad out east to Long Island, ride the Ferris wheel at Coney Island, spend Saturday nights sipping cosmopolitans at the Soho Grand, followed by lazy Sunday afternoons brunching in Katz's Diner. In every single one of these fantasies, she'd imagined doing these things with other people, a husband, a partner, girlfriends. She was never alone. Yet now she was, completely, utterly. She shook the thought away and glanced up at the departures board again, trying to ignore the lump in her throat. 3.5 hours to go. Still no check-in desk. From the depths of her bag, she heard the tinny sound of her ringtone, and her whole body tensed as she dug it out. It was silent now, but the words on the screen glowed at her accusingly. One missed call. Dom. She stared at it for a few moments, imagining what Dom might be doing right now, apart from ringing her, of course. Usually at this time on a Sunday morning, he'd be kicking off his running trainers, stretching his hamstrings, then standing at the sink, downing a glass of water, rehydrating after a long run. After that, he'd make buttery scrambled eggs with crispy bacon and fried bread, which they'd eat together in front of the tiny coal fire in their living room. Bea couldn't see out of the window from where she was sitting, but she already knew how cold it was, having arrived at the airport just as it was starting to get light, the hazy peach sky peeling off its nighttime coat to reveal a chink of light at the end of the runway. It had been absolutely Baltic then, the sort of cold that felt like it might rip the skin from the back of your throat and seep into your bones. But she knew, under normal circumstances, that Dom would still have gone for his run no matter what. The roads could be sheer ice, the pipes frozen solid, and Dom would simply add more clothes and off he'd go. She wondered whether he'd been today, and if he'd remembered to get the fire going before he'd gone out. That was usually her job. She pictured him on the sofa in their freezing living room, fingers of ice creeping through gaps in the ancient sash windows, the walls failing to cling onto any remnant of warmth whatsoever, and her stomach lurched. How could she be doing this to him? He hadn't done anything to deserve this. She jumped as her phone beeped loudly and the screen lit up with a ghostly green light. One new text message. Her thumb hovered over the green accept button. Should she read it? Before she could overthink it, she clicked through to the message. I know you're probably not going to change your mind, but I just want you to know you're being ridiculous. Also, get a flat sorted soon so I can come and stay. Kiss. She smiled. Not Dom after all, but Mia making her smile even now. God, she loved the bones of that girl. It was as much of a wrench to leave her behind as it was Dom. And yet here she was, regardless. Bea stood, threw the rest of her sandwich in the bin and marched towards the British Airways check-in desks. A few people were hovering, looking lost. A lone woman in the blue, white and red of BA loitered behind a counter, trying not to catch anyone's eye. Bea swooped towards her before anyone else spotted her. Hi, she said, trying out her friendliest smile. Good morning, madam. How may I help you? Bea stopped. The words caught in her throat. Something about the kindness in this woman's eyes had undone her, and she knew if she tried to say another word she might cry. She swallowed. Sorry, Can you tell me which desk I need for the flight to New York, please? The words felt scratchy in her throat. It will be desks 14 to 18, she said, pointing over Bea's left shoulder. They should open in about, she checked her watch, 20 minutes. Great, thank you. Bea turned to walk away when the woman's voice stopped her in her tracks again. She swiveled round. Sorry? I was just letting you know that the flight has been delayed. Oh, how long? About an hour, I'm afraid. Sorry. Bea nodded, tears pricking her eyes. Okay, thanks. As Bea walked away, she felt as if she'd been punctured. All the excitement and decisiveness of a moment ago seeping away, leaving her deflated. Was this the sign she'd been looking for? The sign telling her she shouldn't go? You do know the universe isn't going round giving out signs to Bea Preston every 5 minutes, don't you? She could hear Mia's laughter now as she stood in the middle of the departure hall. Mia was always telling her she was daft for believing in fate and signs. But how were you supposed to know whether something was a good idea or not if you didn't listen to what the universe was trying to tell you? In Bea's opinion, if something kept going wrong, then surely it must be the universe telling you not to do it. She shook the thought from her head. She was just looking for excuses now, for a get-out clause. She dragged her case across the tiled floor, one of the wheels squealing in protest, and followed the barriers marking the as-yet non-existent queue for check-in until she reached the front. Despite the early hour, there were already a couple of people in front of her. One, a woman in her 50s or thereabouts, whip-thin, not a perfectly highlighted hair out of place, tapping away on her mobile phone. The other, a younger man in dark jeans and a battered leather jacket, his short dark hair spiked on top. He turned and gave Bea a smile, then turned away again before she could smile back. She sighed, propped her carry-on bag on top of her suitcase and pulled out a copy of Red magazine. Even though she loved these magazines, devoured them every single month, as if reading about all these amazing places, beauty tricks and fashion tips, she could turn herself into the perfect woman. She knew it wasn't healthy. She didn't like to dwell too much on why she was so desperate to work for a publication like this, but at least for now, the features were helping to take her mind off everything else. By the time the queue began to move, there was a line snaking behind Bea, and she was glad she'd had the foresight to get near the front. The longer the wait to get rid of her suitcase, the more likely she was to change her mind. Once that was gone, she had to get on that plane no matter what. She hauled her case onto the scales and handed over her passport. This was it. Since 9/11, airport security had been a nightmare, and it was another hour before Bea emerged through the other side into the duty-free shop, buckling her belt back up, putting her watch back on and reattaching her necklace. Lighter now without her suitcase, she hitched her hold-all onto her shoulder and meandered around the perfume section. The air was thick with a mixture of heady scents, and Bea felt the beginnings of a sneeze. She picked up a bottle, sniffed it, put it back down. She spritzed herself with Clarins eau de namissant, which always reminded her of Mia, who seemed to douse herself in the stuff daily, and took a deep breath in. She trailed her fingers over the giant Toblerones, her mind wandering. Her mum loved these, especially the dark chocolate ones. It never ceased to amaze Bea how her mum stayed so slim when she could mainline chocolate like it was going out of fashion. But that was what happened when you couldn't sit still, when your life revolved around looking after everyone else's needs before your own. Her heart contracted now as she thought about her mum, about how confused and hurt she'd been when Bea had told her she was going to New York. "But that's a long way to go for a couple of days, isn't it?" Ange had said. "I'm not going for a couple of days, Mum. I'm going to stay." "Stay? What do you mean? For Christmas? But you're always here for Christmas." Bea had held her breath as she said the next words, ready for the onslaught of indignation when realization dawned. "Yes, for Christmas. And for a while after that." The silence that followed had been worse than any angry words Ange might have thrown at her. The only time her mum kept quiet was when she was so furious she couldn't form the words to express it. So Bea had gabbled, had told her it wouldn't be forever, that she might not even like it, that she just needed to get some distance from everything, to try something new, to work out what she wanted to do with the rest of her life. The one thing she didn't tell her was the truth, but she didn't ever plan to do that. "Oh, Bea," her mum had said eventually, "you've always had your head in the clouds, but life isn't a fairy tale, you know, no matter how much you want it to be." Bea knew that only too well, but didn't say so. Instead, she just whispered, "I'm sorry," and hung up before her mum could ask her anything else. But her mum was right, wasn't she? Life wasn't a fairy tale. You only had to look at her to see that. This time last week, Bea had been holding down a steady job. Okay, she wasn't exactly respected, and her promotion seemed to be getting further out of reach rather than closer, but she could be patient. As well as a lovely flat and a kind, loving partner. But now she was running away from something that she could barely even admit to herself in some sort of harebrained scheme to, what? Start again? Reinvent herself? Find herself? She felt embarrassed even thinking those words. The truth was, she was terrified she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Less than an hour to go, and already a final call had gone out for all passengers on BA Flight 0468 to please make their way to gate number 63. Bea's heart was hammering so fast she felt as though she might pass out. Her hands shook so much she could barely keep hold of the passport and boarding pass she was clinging onto for dear life. Her knuckles were white, her face ashen. "This isn't you, Bea." Mia's words were imprinted on her brain, but Mia was wrong. Bea could do this. She was doing it. She stood, brushed imaginary crumbs from her jeans, hooked her jacket over her arm, and picked up her cabin hold-all. It weighed a ton and her shoulder ached. She peered inside. Phone, book, notebook, bottle of water, packet of mint humbugs, alongside details of how to get to the hotel she'd booked. Finding accommodation in New York a few days before Christmas was harder than she'd imagined, and this had been the best of what was left. A single bed in a 3-star hotel in Hell's Kitchen. A short walk from the iconic Times Square, the advert said. It would be fine. It was only for a couple of weeks. She was trying not to think too much about what she was going to do after that. Her savings wouldn't last for long if she didn't find somewhere more permanent pretty quickly. She swallowed, then glanced at the departure board one last time. Her flight was flashing amber now. Last call for all passengers to JFK, scrolling across the screen like ticker tape. Her stomach tightened. It was time. She took a few steps away from the bank of chairs and began to stride in the direction of the gate, keeping her pace steady, her breathing regular. She didn't want to be the last person to board, everyone staring at her as she bumbled down the aisle. She stepped onto the travelator, then off the other end. The gate was closer now. She could see it in the distance, above the heads of all the other passengers off to celebrate the festive season with loved ones. Was she the only person travelling to spend Christmas Day alone? Her mouth felt dry, and she tried to lick her lips. And that was when it happened. Bam! It felt as though a fissure had ripped through the ground beneath her feet, and she crashed onto the tiled floor. At first, the pain in her left thigh was all she could think about. Then her left wrist began to throb. She lifted her head, her vision blurred. Where was her bag? She twisted round, saw it skittering across the floor, its contents spilling as it went. "Oh my God, I am so sorry." Bea twisted her head towards the source of the voice. A figure hovered beside her, silhouetted against the glass ceiling. The person was holding out her hand. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't looking where I was going. I'm such a moron." Bea still didn't reply, but took the hand. It felt warm as it gently tugged her to her feet. The ground tipped for a moment, and her hand rested on her elbow. Finally, she looked at the person who'd sent her flying. The first thing she noticed was his deep blue eyes watching her, a deep groove between his eyebrows. "Did you hit your head?" She lifted her hand up to her head and patted it. She shook her head. The man's hand was still on her elbow, and he steered her slowly towards a nearby bank of chairs where someone scooched up to let her sit. "My bag," she managed to croak, and pointed towards where it lay in the middle of the concourse, its contents spread out like a mini obstacle course. "Wait there," he said. She watched as he gathered her belongings and scooped them up. She hoped her brand new MP3 player wasn't broken. "Here, I think that's everything," the man said, returning and handing her bag over. "Thanks." He crouched down beside her again, and she looked at him, surprised. "Are you sure you're okay?" His voice was laced with real concern, and she nodded again. "I'm fine." "Do you mind if... It's just, He gestured helplessly towards the mass of people crushing forwards. been really late. Oh, right, yes, don't miss your flight. Go. She waved her hand in the direction of the gates. Are you sure? Yes. She just wanted him to leave now, couldn't stand the fussing. So when he finally stood and hitched his rucksack onto his shoulder, she felt relieved. Well, okay, He glanced towards the gate again. Look, have a safe flight, and sorry, again. He hovered a moment longer, then he was gone, and she watched his ancient leather jacket and dark head until he melted away into the crowd. She sat for a moment longer. She still felt a little dazed and let her vision blur as she watched people hurrying for planes, holding hands, buying coffee, reading books. This wasn't a sign not to go. It absolutely wasn't. It was only some clumsy man not looking where he was going. She needed to stop looking for signs and get on that bloody plane. She just needed a moment of calm before... Her phone was ringing. Or maybe it was someone else's. She strained to hear it properly. Nope, it was definitely hers. She could feel the vibrations through her thighs from the bag on her lap. She should ignore it. Her plane was boarding right now. It was due to leave in 20 minutes. She was going to miss it. But still, something kept her there, glued to the seat. What if it was important? It could be Mum, ringing to tell her Dad had finally got a date for his knee replacement. Or her sister, Alice, telling her that her niece, Lara, had fallen from a horse and broken her arm. What if it was Mia? She'd give anything to hear her voice right now, telling one of her ridiculous jokes, or even telling her how stupid she was being again. Except it could be Dom, of course. And she knew that, if she heard his voice begging her to come home, she might not be strong enough to put up a fight. The phone stopped ringing. That was that then. She stood and began to move towards the gate again. She had to hurry. She was almost there now, and the crowd had thinned ahead of her. She was the last one. She picked up her pace, striding as fast as she could. Her bloody phone was ringing again. She slowed, then came to a stop. She should definitely ignore it. But what if it was an emergency? She should at least check before she got on the plane and switched her phone off for 8 hours, right? Cross with herself for being weak, she dug her hand in her bag and rooted around for her phone and pulled out her tiny Nokia. Fuck, it was Dom. She couldn't ignore him again. She pressed the green answer button and held the phone to her ear. Hi, Dom. Oh, thank God. She flinched at the relief in his voice. You're still here, in London. I am. Does this mean you've changed your mind? That you're coming home? His voice sounded reedy, full of hope. She didn't reply straight away, and the silence stretched and warped. Bea, are you still there? I'm still here, Dom. In Heathrow. In Heathrow. So it doesn't mean anything. They spoke at the same time, and both stopped. Bea spoke next. The plane is just delayed, she said, as gently as she could. So you haven't... He stopped. You haven't changed your mind then? His voice sounded small, hurt, and she felt herself soften a little. She should throw him a rope here, anything to stop him sounding so utterly bereft. Before she could say anything else, Dom spoke again. Please come home. I'll change. Things will change. I'll do whatever you want. His words sliced through her heart, cleaving it in two. But she had to stay strong, because this wasn't about Dom, it was about her, and trying to work out why she was so desperately unhappy. And although she had no intention of telling Dom what had made her finally snap, she couldn't, she never would. She did know that at some point, next week, next month, next year, she would probably have broken Dom's heart anyway. Because she wanted more. She wanted the fairy tale, or at least a chance of it. But now here he was, pleading with her to change her mind, to stay. And after 5 years together, didn't he deserve better than this? The truth was, if she got on that plane, she'd break Dom's heart. But if she stayed, she'd break her own. Everything rested on her next words. Should she go? Or should she stay? Chapter 1. Go. December 2002. Bea bundled up the aisle, her armpits damp, her face flushed. She steadfastly refused to meet the eyes of the other passengers as the air steward, with his bleach blonde hair and clean-shaven jawbone, showed her to her seat towards the back of the plane. He was trying to be polite, but it was clear she was persona non grata, given that she'd almost held up an entire 747 full of passengers by being so disgustingly, inexplicably late. "I'm so sorry, I had to take an important call," she'd offered inadequately, as she'd almost skidded to a halt at the boarding gate just as the British Airways staff were pulling the barrier across. "We've closed the gate, madam," the woman had said, smiling politely. "I know, I'm so sorry," Bea said. "Please, you have to let me on the plane." They'd stood for a split second, a mini standoff, before the air stewardess had let out a long puff of air and opened the barrier and ushered her through. Bea had handed over her passport gratefully, and now here she was, facing the wrath of several hundred people as they waited for her to sit down so they could finally take off. She was almost tempted to get off and book a seat on another flight, just so she didn't have to face everyone for the next 8 hours. Almost. "Here you are, madam," the air steward said, gripping her elbow and pointing at the only empty seat in the whole plane. "Thank you," she said. To her absolute horror, her seat was in the middle of a row of 3, which meant the person seated in the aisle had to stand up to let her in. And he certainly made a good show of it, huffing and puffing and heaving himself around while Bea slipped in beside him, mortified. Finally, she was settled. There was no going back now. As the man beside her sat, pulling his table down and reclipping his seatbelt noisily, she dug her iPod out of her bag, shoved her bag under her seat — there was no way she was asking aisleman to stand again so she could put it in the overhead luggage compartment — and kept her gaze firmly on the back of the seat in front of her. This was going to be a long flight. She could feel her breath slowing, and she tipped her head back, closed her eyes, and sucked in some long, slow lungfuls of air. Thank God. Now was not the time for a panic attack. She let her shoulders relax and, "Well, this is awkward." A deep voice made her eyes snap open, and she whipped her head round to see where it was coming from. It took her a moment to focus on the face of the man in the window seat who was studying her with a lopsided grin. But then she felt her face redden in recognition. "Oh, it's you." "It is," said the man who'd sent her sprawling across the busy airport concourse just a short while ago. Her heart sank. She turned away from him and started to untangle her headphones, hoping he'd get the message and leave her alone. "Listen, I really am sorry about before. I was running really late." He gave her a sheepish grin. "Although it looks as though there wasn't any need for me to be in such a hurry, given I was nowhere near the last person on the plane." His voice was rich and deep with a broad Irish twang. She rolled her eyes, very funny. "Oh, come on. I was just kidding, so how's the rest?" She really didn't want to engage in conversation with anyone. She had too much on her mind. But it was also deeply ingrained in her not to be rude. She rotated her wrist a few times and winced. "I think I'll live." "Well, that's a relief. Any other injuries?" "Only my ego." "Ah, you're fine. It's me that should be embarrassed, barreling around like a feckin' Egypt, not looking where I was going." "That's true." He was silent for a moment, and she hoped he'd got the message that she didn't want to talk, but then, "Should we try that again, then?" She stared at his hand, which he held between them, tempted to leave him hanging. Because this was her problem, wasn't it? That she was always worried what other people thought, worried that if she said no to someone, they wouldn't like her. And even though it didn't make any difference to her life whether or not this man thought well of her, old habits die hard. So she reluctantly took his hand and gave it a brief shake. "Sure, I'm Bea." "Like the insect?" She frowned. "Like the princess." He looked puzzled, and she rolled her eyes. "It's what I always got called at school, after Princess Beatrice was born." When he still looked none the wiser, she added, "The royal family?" "Oh," he said eventually, clearly disinterested. "I can't be asked with that entitled lot." His face broke into a grin again. A grin Bea couldn't help noticing that lit up his whole face. "Anyway, Bea, it's very nice to meet you properly when you're not sprawled across the floor." She was about to reply something about that being entirely his fault when the plane began to move backwards and the safety announcement crackled into life. Bea turned to face the front, watching blankly as the familiar words about airbags and emergency exits and inflatable life jackets washed over her. Then they were taxiing along the runway and speeding up, her head pressed back into the headrest, her hands gripping the armrests until her knuckles turned white. And she was doing this. She was really doing this. She was leaving behind everything she knew, everyone she loved, and she was flying to New York by herself for a fresh start, right? Oh God, what was she doing? Her heart thumped loudly and her mouth was dry. She thought she might faint, and she took deep breaths in through her mouth and out through her nose. To one side of her, Aisleman was already sound asleep, and she envied him, being able to relax like that. She'd never loved flying, but as she got older, she'd begun to dread it. Takeoff, at least. It was as though she finally realized how delicate the line was between life and death. Hard in her throat, she strained to listen to the sounds the engine was making, as if she could recognize a problem if there was one, and studied the reactions of the cabin crew carefully. If seasoned flyers were worried, she would be too. Otherwise, she could usually talk herself down from her panic. They seemed perfectly relaxed, and she tried to do the same. Finally, as the plane leveled out and the seatbelt signs went off, Bea felt her breath begin to even out, her heart rate begin to slow. They were cruising now. Maybe she could sleep for a bit, give her brain a rest after the last few days. "So, how come you're off to New York, all on your lonesome?" Her heart sank as she turned to face her companion in the window seat. "It's a long story," she said, hoping he'd leave it at that. "No such luck. We've got 8 hours. She shook her head and turned away. "Come on now. Throw me a scrap here. It's bloody boring flying. We might as well pass the time." "I thought I might watch a film," she said, plucking the in-flight magazine from the back of the seat in front of her. "Ah, sure, but you can do that later. Come on, humour me. Please." She sighed and twisted round to face him as much as the cramped space would allow, which wasn't a lot, as she discovered when her leg brushed against his. She pulled it away. "You haven't even told me your name," she said. He grinned. "Nope." She frowned. "What do you mean, nope?" "I mean nope, you're right. I haven't told you my name, and I'm not going to either." "But I've told you mine." "I know. Still not telling you, though. Not yet, at least." "But—" She didn't really know what to say to that. She squinted at him, trying to read his face. "Why? Are you some sort of spy?" "Yep, top secret spy, which means that if I told you my name, I'd have to kill you." She rolled her eyes again. "Come on, tell me. Unless you're on the run or something, wanted by Interpol." She didn't even really care what his name was, to be honest, but now she was determined to make him spill the beans, intrigued as to what the big mystery might be. But he still shook his head. "Can't." "Why not?" "Because it's rubbish, and you'd judge me." "I would never do that." She felt indignation rising in her chest. But he just laughed. "Believe me, you would. I'd judge me if I met me. People always do. And it always feels unfair to have people deciding I'm a prick when they've only just met me because of something my parents did to me." He smirked. "I'm quite capable of making them think that by myself." "It can't be that bad." "Believe me, I've had enough women ghost me after a first date to know it is." "That might just be your terrible personality." He let out a bark of laughter. "Oof, touché." They both paused. Then, even though Bea really wanted to stop talking to this man and lose herself in her own thoughts about what a mess she'd made of everything, she couldn't help herself. "Can I guess?" He shrugged. "If you like, but I'm confident you'll never get it." "I might." "Go on then." "Trevor." "Nope. Trevor's a perfectly nice name." "Boris." "Nope." "Elvis." "Nope, that would be cool." She frowned. "Ebenezer?" He shook his head, grinning. "Told you you'd never get it." She scratched her head. Then her eyes widened as something occurred to her. Oh my God, it's not something awful like Adolf, is it? No. Now that would be worse. Okay, so come on then. If it's not as bad as Adolf, it can't be that terrible. He shook his head. Nope, you're not getting me that easily. Fine, don't then. She turned away and folded her arms across her chest. This conversation was clearly finished, which meant she could finally wallow in peace. And to her amazement, Mystery Man seemed to get the message. Relieved to have some quiet at last, Bea stuck her headphones over her ears, closed her eyes, and let her mind wander to the sound of Cooler Shaker's Hush. She must have drifted off, because the next thing she knew, someone was tugging at her sleeve, and she snapped her eyes open to find a plate of cheese and biscuits hovering in front of her face. Oh, thanks, she mumbled, taking it from the smiling cabin crew, along with a cup of tea. She pulled her table down and balanced the plate and drink on it, then checked her watch. She'd been asleep for almost an hour, which felt like a miracle after the last few nights of snatched hours here and there. Somehow, though, it made her feel worse, and a band of pressure now stretched across her neck and head. She rubbed at it. Headache? Mystery Man was watching her with concern. His face was sleep-crumpled, and he had a small bottle of red wine on his pull-down table. A bit, yeah. Wasn't me, was it? She frowned. What was he on about now? She rubbed her eyes. Was what you? Your head? He gestured vaguely in the direction of where she was rubbing. When you fell. Oh, no. She shook her head and winced. No, don't worry about that. I'm just exhausted. It's been a bit of a shit week. That was the understatement of the decade. Oh, good. Well, not good, but you know what I mean. She nodded and unwrapped her packet of crackers. You can talk about it if you like. She sighed and turned to face him again. Talk about what? Your shit week? The state of British politics, planes, my disastrous fashion sense? He shrugged. Anything you like. Wow, this guy really wanted to talk. And now she thought about it, perhaps having a meaningless chat with a stranger might actually be a good thing, especially if the alternative involved her wallowing in her misery alone. Are you sure you want to hear it? I'm all ears. He took a swig of his wine. She turned to look at him, properly this time. She hadn't noticed before how handsome he was. Not in the traditional sense, he was no Brad Pitt, but in a quirky, slightly scruffy way. His dark hair was tousled and spiked. Deliberately or not, she had no idea, and his arms, exposed now he'd taken his jacket off, were covered in tattoos, dark and swirling. She found herself staring at them for longer than was strictly polite. Nice tattoos, she said. Thanks. My mum hates them, but most of them have got a meaning. He glanced at her, gave a quick grin. Don't worry, I'll wait until we run out of interesting conversation before I bore you with that. Thanks, she smiled back. Mystery Man. It felt weird that she was about to start telling him all her problems when she didn't even know his name. Twisted in his seat so that they were half facing each other and folded his arms over his chest. So, what brings you to New York, all alone 2 days before Christmas? It's 3 days. Fine, but it will be almost 2 by the time we get there, and anyway, that's just semantics. What gives? She looked at her hands, wondering how much she should confide in this complete stranger. Perhaps it would be good for her to get it out there, hear the words. Perhaps it would jolt her out of herself, make her realize how ridiculous she was being. Perhaps. I'm running away. Best to keep it simple, after all. He gave a slow nod. Right. What from? She let out a long sigh. Life, stuff, arseholes. He studied her. Now I'm intrigued by the plural of arseholes. More than one of them is bad luck. Yeah, except, well, actually, my boyfriend isn't an arsehole. Not at all, really. He's pretty decent, actually. She felt a tear leak from the corner of her eye and track down her cheek. She brushed it away. I see. So it's not an evil ex then, as I'd suspected. No, it's not. She felt more tears building, and she swallowed and took a sip of tea until she felt them subside. Sorry, it's been a tricky week. It's fine. You don't have to explain anything to me. I'm just a pair of ears. He flicked his ears with his fingertips and grinned. Seriously, though, I'm not judging. I'm hardly in a position to, even if I wanted to. She smiled gratefully, surprised at how much she wanted to open up to this man she'd only just met and tell him all her secrets. But she wouldn't, not all of them. Dom, my boyfriend, ex-boyfriend now, I guess. The realization hit her like a kick to the stomach. He's the reason I was so late onto the plane, because he rang and begged me to change my mind and go home. She thought about his voice now, how he'd sounded so hurt and confused. She'd been so close to turning round and walking out of that airport, getting into a taxi and going home and telling him she was sorry and she was home and she'd never leave him again. But then she thought about how stuck she felt in her life, how she could never talk to him about her hopes and dreams without him somehow making her feel she was being silly, overreaching, unrealistic. And she also thought about how she would feel if she told him the truth about what had happened to make her finally walk out of her seemingly happy life, and he downplayed it, or worse, simply didn't believe her. And in the end, that was what had carried her feet towards the plane, towards New York, instead, towards this man. She looked up at him now, at his warm, expectant face. Actually, do you mind if we talk about something else? This is too hard. It's not me at all. Sure. He had such an easy way about him, so different to Dom, who overanalyzed everything, who needed to get to the nitty-gritty of something every time. It could be exhausting. And something about this man was refreshing. So if we're going to chat all the way across the Atlantic and you're not going to tell me your name, I'm going to have to make one up, she said. Make one up? Yeah. His lips curled into a lopsided smile again. Right. What did you have in mind? She thought for a minute. Paddy. Nice cliché. Sorry. She grinned back at him. Well, come on. You must have a nickname at least. I do. And? I'm not telling you that either. Right then, Paddy it is. Fine. He drained his glass. Drink? Why not? He reached up and flicked on his light to get the attention of the air steward, and Bea tried not to notice the strip of tanned skin that was exposed above his waistband as he did. She did not need to be thinking about another man right now. An air steward was by their side within seconds. What can I get you, sir? Paddy looked at Bea, eyebrows raised in question. Gin? Sure. I'll have a couple of doubles each, please, he said. Oh, and a bottle of... He looked at her. Red? White? Really? Wine too? He shrugged. It is Christmas. Okay, red then. As the air steward passed them their drinks, Paddy leaned over her and she could smell his unfamiliar scent. Was it his usual one or something he'd spritzed on himself in the duty-free shop, the way she had? She breathed it in deeply, a mixture of lemon and thyme and something else, a deeper, thicker smell. You okay? She snapped her eyes open, her face flaming. What? Yes, sorry, I was just closing my eyes for a second. God, how mortifying. Thank God he couldn't read her mind. She took the proffered bottle of red and tried not to meet Paddy's eye. Wine or gin first? Gin. Atta girl. Paddy poured their gins and added the smallest splash of tonic water, and she took the opportunity to compose herself. When he held up his plastic cup and tapped it soundlessly against hers, she smiled at him. She hadn't planned on getting drunk on the first day of her new life, but perhaps it would help her forget her worries, just for a little bit. She took a sip and let the icy liquid settle and relax her limbs. She turned her head. So I've told you my sorry little tale of why I'm flying to New York all by myself. Why are you going? I live there. Oh, you don't sound like a native New Yorker. No, but I've lived there a few years. With someone? A look flitted across his face that she couldn't read. But then he straightened his features so quickly she wondered whether she'd imagined it. Not anymore, no. It was clear from his tone that particular avenue of conversation was closed, so she didn't push it. What do you do over there, then? She said, deftly changing the subject. He took a gulp of his gin, knocking almost half of it back in one go and wiping his hand across his mouth before answering. I'm in advertising, he said. Fancy? Yeah, it's all right. He downed the rest of his gin. Pays the bills. He glanced down at her half-full drink. Come on, you're falling behind. Sorry. She dutifully took a delicate sip of gin and tonic. So have you sorted somewhere to stay? She quickly finished her drink and waited for him to pour the next one. Felt like she was going to need it. Kind of. So? She squirmed. I've booked a couple of weeks at a hotel near Times Square, but I can't afford to stay for long. And after that? She shook her head. I don't know yet. A silence fell, and Bea didn't know what to say. Eventually, she asked, Where do you live? I'm in West Village. When she looked puzzled, he explained, It's downtown, about 20 minutes from Brooklyn Bridge. West Village, downtown, Brooklyn Bridge. She rolled the names over in her mouth. They felt as familiar to her as yellow taxicabs in the Empire State Building, even though they were places she'd only seen and heard about from the comfort of her home in London. The idea that she was about to see these places in real life, maybe even to live in them, filled her with a fresh wave of excitement that spread from the tips of her toes to the top of her head and made her shudder. If you like. She realised Paddy had been saying something. Sorry, what was that? Her vision was already a bit blurry from too much gin, and her face tingled. Are you pissed? He was studying her face rather too closely. No, she grinned. Maybe a little, but in my defence, I haven't had much to eat apart from these crackers all day. God, you are a lightweight, aren't you? I think it's the stress of everything. She trailed off, aware that was somewhere she didn't want to go. She reached for the wine bottle. Should we start this? Are you sure you should drink any more just yet? She shrugged. In for a penny, eh? Besides, we wouldn't want to waste it. She splashed wine into both their glasses, then took a sip. The wine felt rich and fruity in her mouth, and as she swallowed it, it warmed her from the inside. So, what were you saying? Her mouth felt woolly. It wasn't unpleasant. I was just saying if you need any recommendations or someone to show you around, I'd be happy to. She froze. As tempting as it would be to let this handsome man show her the sights of New York, she also knew it would be a mistake. She was here to find herself, clear her head, work out what she wanted from her life, not to throw herself straight into another relationship or something more complicated with someone else. No, she had to be firm here. Thanks, she muttered vaguely. I'll see how I get on. Really firm, Bea. They fell into a silence for a while, and Bea took the opportunity to watch a movie. She chose 2 weeks' notice simply because it was set in New York. Beside her, Paddy did the same. Film finished, Bea was beginning to need the loo, but the man beside her was sound asleep. She unclipped her seatbelt and carefully shimmied into position before sliding her body over his sleeping form. Halfway across, she thought she should probably just have woken him, and that if he opened his eyes right at this moment to find her straddling him, she'd have to throw herself out of the plane with shame. But she was committed to this stupid idea now, so she kept moving, inch by agonizing inch, closer to freedom. And then she was there. She was free and in the aisle, and as she wobbled towards the loo, it was definitely just the plane making her stumble, not the gin. She felt a sense of relief to be away from Paddy for a few moments. What was it about him that was making her feel so unbalanced, so unlike herself? Was it just that someone was showing an interest in talking to her about things she wasn't keen to shine a light on just yet? Yes, that was it. It must be. The toilet was free, and she slid the lock shut behind her and almost fell onto the loo seat. The mirror above the sink reflected her image back at her, and she peered at it more closely. Why was she so blurry? She rubbed the mirror with her sleeve. Oh, it wasn't the mirror that was blurry, it was her. She grinned. Her teeth were slightly purple, her cheeks were flushed, and she had a manic glow in her eyes. Christ, she looked insane. She splashed her face with water and took a couple of deep breaths. Okay, she could do this. She could get through the rest of this flight without fucking up, without saying anything she shouldn't, and without throwing herself at a random man. Yes, she could. Hands washed, she unlocked the door and walked as straight as she could manage back to her seat. The man in the aisle was awake now, and when she stood beside him waiting for him to move, he paused a few seconds before hauling himself to his feet. God, if you don't want to move, don't choose an aisle seat, she thought, but didn't say. He wouldn't look her in the eye, and as she slid in, she could see Paddy grinning at her. What's so funny? She said, more irritably than she intended. He studied her for a moment, and her cheeks began to flush. Did she have something on her face? Oh, God, were her flies undone? She glanced down, but all seemed fine. By the time she looked back up, Paddy was looking away, drinking his almost finished glass of wine. So, what were we talking about? He said. She shrugged. Not much, I don't think. Well then, why don't you tell me a bit more about yourself? Not the complicated stuff. He waved his hands in the air like he was getting rid of an unsavoury smell, but just general stuff, you know, like what your parents are like, who your friends are, what you like doing. Really? You want to know all this stuff? He shrugged. There's feck all else to do for the next. He checked his watch. 2.5 hours. Her heart sank. God, 2.5 hours and she'd be in New York, alone, at Christmas. She swallowed. There's not much to tell you. I grew up in North London with my mum and dad, Ange and Pete. Mum has spent her entire life trying to look after everyone else, while Dad always worked nights so we hardly ever saw him. He's obsessed with Arsenal and used to take us to watch matches on the weekends he had off. She gulped some more wine. I've got an older sister, Alice, who's like a carbon copy of Mum, except with more money, and has 2 kids and a husband and still lives about 5 minutes away from our parents, which is why she's always going to be the favourite. My twin brothers, Charlie and Rob, are 6 years older than me, so we're not very close. Wow, you're one of 4. Yeah, and I'm the Irish one. She turned her head to face him. How many siblings do you have then? He looked sheepish for a moment. Well, 5. But in my defence, most English people I know only ever seem to have 1 sibling. It's weird. Bea smiled. We're a weird family. My gran only lives a couple of doors down too. She's who I was named after. Oh, not the princess, then? No, she wasn't born till I was 13. It was at school people used to call me that. Annoying. It was all right. She paused. So 5 siblings, eh? Yeah. Do they all still live in Ireland? Yeah, every single one of them. It's only me who's disgraced the family by moving to America. And you don't plan to move back? Bea felt Paddy stiffen beside her. His shoulders hunched and he stared at the back of the seat in front like it was the most interesting thing in the world. No, I'm tied to the US for a while longer. She nodded. She longed to ask more, but she also knew what it was like when people pried into things you didn't want to talk about. This is a big thing for me too, she said instead. None of my family has ever moved abroad. I can't quite believe it's me doing it, to be honest. Why's Dad? I'm not brave. Never have been. Almost changed my mind about coming 5 minutes before I got on the plane, for God's sake, but, well, she held her hands out, palms up. Here I am. Here you are, and here I am. He held his cup up and she tapped hers against it again. You are brave, though. She snapped her head round. Sorry? He turned to look at her. His eyes were warm and she felt a shiver run down her spine. You are brave. She shook her head. I'm really not. I've always been a coward. In secondary school, I was the only one who didn't dare climb up the climbing wall on a school trip, and everyone laughed at me. But as I stood at the bottom and looked up, all I could think about was what would happen if I fell. I just couldn't make my feet move any closer. She shrugged. It sort of set the tone for my life. He was still staring at her. Why was he still staring at her? You're braver than you think you are, he said, his voice low. What makes you say that? You're starting again, pressing the reset button. That's not cowardly. It takes a lot of balls. She looked down at the plastic cup in her hands. Was she braver than she gave herself credit for? From the moment she decided to book this flight, she'd thought of it as running away. But maybe Paddy was right. Maybe she was brave. Maybe instead of running away from her life, she was giving herself the chance to make a new one. Maybe this was the bravest choice of all. Bea's face felt cold. Why was her face cold? She prized one eye open and could only make out the back of the seat in front. Her neck ached, and when she put her hand to her cheek, it was wet. Oh, God, she'd been dribbling. She swiped the dampness away and hoped nobody had noticed. But when she finally opened her eyes fully, she saw Paddy watching her and smiling. "Hello, sleepyhead," he said. She sat up properly. "What time is it?" Her voice was croaky. She cleared her throat. "We'll be landing in about 20 minutes. She was fully alert now. 20 minutes? Yep, almost in the Big Apple. Excited? She stopped. How did she feel? Excited, sure, but what else? Her stomach churned and she had a slight headache, but that was probably a hangover. She held her hands out in front of her. They shook slightly. "I think I'm fucking petrified." Before she knew what had happened, Paddy had threaded his fingers through hers. His palm felt warm, and she watched as if from a distance as he rested their entwined hands on the armrest between them. She wanted to ask him what he was doing. She should probably pull her hand away. But she didn't do either of those things, and instead they sat in silence as the plane lowered slowly towards JFK Airport. Bea didn't move a muscle until the wheels touched the tarmac, and then she felt the tension slide from her just at the moment Paddy took his hand away. As they taxied towards the airport, the lights came on full. She was glad to see that Aisleman had also dribbled a bit, and as they came to a halt, he stood and she realised how close she'd been shoved towards Paddy. The next few minutes were spent retrieving bags from overhead lockers and under seats, pulling on coats and trudging in single file towards the open doors. Bea's back ached and her legs were stiff, and she felt vaguely self-conscious as she made her way through the doors and along the air bridge toward the terminal, unsure whether Paddy was still following her. She glanced behind. There were a few people between her and Paddy. She was surprised to feel disappointed. Passport control was hell. Paddy was quite far behind her by now, and she kept passing him as the queue snaked round the temporary barriers. They smiled at each other every time they passed, but said nothing. Bea could still feel the memory of his palm against hers and wondered what it had meant. Had he just been comforting her as they landed? Bea still hadn't switched on her phone, not yet ready to hear the slew of messages that had no doubt been left while she'd been in the air. Finally, she reached the front of the queue and handed over her passport. As the humorless guard behind the plexiglass studied her face, she tried to wipe what she felt was a guilty expression off it. Authority always made her feel as though she were doing something wrong, even though she'd never done anything wrong in her life, at least not in a legal sense. The seconds stretched on, and for a moment she had a horrible vision of being dragged away to be strip-searched, sniffer dogs finding drugs stashed in her bag, being thrown in jail surrounded by murderers and rapists and, "Thank you, ma'am. Have a good day." The guard was holding out her passport, and she snatched it from him and hurried towards the baggage reclaim. The carousel was at a standstill, the crowd surrounding it growing fidgety and agitated. Bea spotted the man from the aisle seat and made a beeline for the opposite side, where she waited nervously for her back. This was it. She was here. Well, that was as welcoming as usual. A familiar voice made her jump, and she turned to find Paddy standing beside her, looking tired.